So we're going to take it as from where we left, and we were highlighting that research indicates that those skills that are practiced until they run smoothly have more possibilities of becoming part of our students' long-term memory. So we have been discussing so far the main characteristics to consider in the new circumstances now in which we are teaching and our students are learning. So when it comes to application, then what we are saying is that we are teaching, presenting grammar, vocabulary. We might be presenting a concept. We might be presenting a strategy. Whatever we are presenting, students, of course, will need to practice moving from controlled to less controlled until we go to freer practice. And then we talked and we are talking about how important it is that now students can transfer all that to a variety of scenarios. We are going to discuss now a couple of very important examples. So I'm going to make reference to some examples I presented before when talking about controlled and less controlled practice. If you remember, I showed you some practice activities in which students were dealing with places in town and the prepositions to indicate where those places in town are. And of course, they need to master not only the vocabulary related to places in town, but they must also handle the structural language to say where those places are. So an example of what the application stage would be like is now getting students to actually draw their own neighborhood and the different places in their neighborhood, and then they will have to talk or write about their neighborhood. So why are we giving this as an example of application? Because of course we are moving them from a new scenario now, okay? It's you talking about your own neighborhood, okay? So it's communicative, it's meaningful. Students can relate personally to it because it is my neighborhood, it is the place where I live. And they will have to talk about it. They will have to talk about the places in their neighborhood. So of course they will have to use what they have newly learned, but of course they can also make use of prior existing language. So in a task like this one, students will be able to use the positional language, the vocabulary related to the places in town, but they might also be using other things they want to say. And notice, please, that I have called this a task, okay? So I think that the time has come to talk a little bit about the difference between activity and task. An activity is what you usually encounter in stages such as controlled practice and less controlled and freer practice. They are a little bit more restricted. Remember, we said that, and they truly look like classroom activities, if you want it. Although, of course, we are always contextualizing and having a topic that contextualizes that somehow students can relate to. But why is this one in particular an example of a task? Well, because per definition, a task is some sort of activity in a way that somehow resembles a situation that would normally take place in the real world. So if you think about it, it would be a real world situation that somebody wants to share information with somebody else about the place where you live. So you might be comparing and contrasting your neighborhood to other neighborhoods. And if you think about it, when you say talk about the place where you live, there are so many things that you can say. Not only can you describe it, but you can also say what places you can find in your neighborhood, and you can even open it up a little bit more to say how you feel about your neighborhood, whether you like it or you don't like it. The best things about the neighborhood are the things you like the most and the things you like the least. So we call it an application stage, because I am telling you to talk about your neighborhood, and all those things that you've learned as a language learner, you will transfer onto this situation. Same thing with when I tell you to talk or write about a day in your life, all right? Or, for example, obviously for this a day in my life, we have probably been working with daily activities, and we have also presented the simple present to talk about habitual actions and routines. But now I am telling you to tell me what you do every day, which is a real life situation. There is another example we are going to take a look in depth later on, in which students have been presented with vocabulary related to fitness and health, and they have also learned the structures to give advice or make suggestions. So now they have to give advice or make suggestions to a patient as if they were doctors. These are language situations that would normally take place in the real world. That is why we call them tasks. And again, your turn. What did you do last summer? Remember to write verbs in the past. This is a very teacher-oriented tip of a piece of advice. It's a tip given by a teacher. But actually, I am telling you to tell me about last summer. So this is where you will be transferring what you've learned. In this case, probably vocabulary related to holidays, as well as the simple past, to talk about activities in the past which are over. So this is what application is like. This is where students put everything to the test, all right? One more example that I would like to share with you, like practice writing about future plans and intentions. Of course, we have been working on that. We've presented vocabulary related to probably holidays or the future. We have focused, as far as grammar is concerned, with going to express plans and intentions. And then we give students the possibility to choose whether to talk about their plans for when they grow up, or their plans for the upcoming weekend, or the plans for the summer. So these are conversations, these are topics that you would normally have with somebody in the real world. And for these, for either talking about their plans when they grow up, or next holidays, or next weekend, students will have to transfer everything they've learned. Obviously, you realize that this is what communicatively every language teacher wants. We want them to be able to use what they have learned in a real life situation, but it's absolutely important that we reflect upon all the previous stages until students can do something like this. So I mentioned today, as I was introducing Module 3, that we were going to talk about global communicative objectives and how they guide us. That is why on the screen you've got a compass, all right? So before we move on to global communicative objectives, I want to recap a little bit everything we have mentioned so far. We have talked about presenting the new, and if you remember, we've discussed a lot of golden rules as for how to present vocabulary, how to present grammar, how to present a new strategy. We have devoted a lot of time to that. We have also discussed in depth what happens right after the presentation of anything which is new to our students. And we have mentioned a very important word so far, which happens to be scaffolding. We have reflected upon the importance of immediately engaging our students in practicing the new, and how important it is that we move from the very restricted to less restricted, and how we have to let go. Everything we have discussed as for lesson stages, or the stages of a successful lesson, work in a face-to-face traditional context and need to be considered in this context we have probably never undergone before. All right. Something else we have mentioned is, if you have the possibility of carrying out any of these stages online, whether it is synchronous, let's meet at 4 and have an interactive class, or asynchronous, I send you a video. This would be the case. This is asynchronous online teaching. If you have one possibility or the other, go for it. But something I've been repeating all throughout is that in the absence of those possibilities, it is really very important that we do not fall in just sending homework and assignments that will be absolutely counterproductive when it comes to learning, of course. So having recapped the way I have recapped now, why will I be devoting these last minutes of the whole of Module 3 to objectives? And I'm going to say something powerful. There cannot be any effective lesson without clear objectives. So having said that, I'm going to round up this fourth mini video within Module 3 by saying that when you plan either a face-to-face lesson or an online lesson or a blended lesson, which means it's going to be partly online, partly remote, whatever type of lesson you're planning, when you plan it, you need to get started from the very end. What does this mean? You need to sit down to plan and think, what is it that I want my students to be able to do by the end of this lesson, or by the end of this sequence of lessons, or by the end of this assignment, or by the end of this series of assignments. I need to think about what I want them to be able to do. And once I know very clearly what is it that I want them to be able to do, I start moving backwards, thinking, what is it that I need to teach them, or what is it that they need to revise, practice, and then apply to be able to get there. So this is something we will be discussing now in depth in our fifth video of Module 3. So the right way to go about global communicative objectives is by saying, by the end of this lesson, sequence of lessons, remote assignments, or remote sets of assignments, by the end, and given sufficient practice, students will be able